In today's video, I'm going to be painting the very first page of my brand new watercolor sketchbook. Now, if you're anything like me, the first page of a sketchbook is often very scary to start painting on because you have this beautiful book and you don't want to mess it up. But stick around to see what I like to do to create a fun and relaxing painting on that first page. So today I'm going to be using the Gansai Tambi granulating watercolors. I love these. They're so interesting and they make the most beautiful patterns and colors when you paint with them. Now these come as a pack with 5 colors. And then as you can see here, let me bring this up to the screen. There's also, it's missing here, but it comes with an extra pan for mixing with water. Now, if you're going to be using a lot of these colors at once, I would suggest probably getting a larger palette to use. But for me, I actually tend to use these just 1 or 2 at a time. And so really this one extra pan is all that I need. Now I typically like a nice clean edge on my painting, so I'll very frequently use washi tape to tape off the edges. I always love tape with a fun, cute, colorful pattern, so let's get taping. So for this technique, I'm going to pick a shape that I know I like to paint and then just repeat it over and over in 1 or 2 colors to create a visually interesting pattern. Now you're going to have to bear with me. I know in this video the focus is shifting between the paintbrush and the actual page. I'm new to YouTube, so I will figure it out, but I'll be sure to show some clips later on where the actual page is in focus so that you can really see the brush strokes. So like I said, I try to keep it simple on the first sketchbook page and paint something that I enjoy and that I know I will find relaxing. Not a lot of pressure, just time to de-stress and enjoy and get into that relaxed flow state that I love so much about painting. Okay, so at this point, I'm going to start in with a second color. And if you look closely, you can actually already see the pigments in the first color starting to separate. There's some areas that have a more pinkish hue and others that are much more purple and some that are even looking a little bit blue. This is the granulation process and you'll continue to see the pigments separating until they fully dry. If you're curious, this is the Gansai Tambi granulating watercolor set, as I mentioned, and the name of the first color I used was Aurora Violet, and now I am using Aurora Blue. So we're just going to go in with Aurora Blue and do the same shape and pattern using this second color. Now that I've gotten down a bunch of shapes in Aurora Blue, I'm actually going to go back in and scatter some violet shapes throughout the page, and then go back and forth between the 2 colors, placing shapes in whatever space and orientation I think will make for an interesting pattern. Here you can really see the blue paint is starting to separate out and create some orange sections. I just love how these paints continue to change until they dry, so it's always kind of a surprise what they end up looking like on the paper at the end. So I'm going to slow down here because in this section I actually make a mistake. You'll see it right there. This is a really small area and I like to have a nice white space between all of my shapes, but in this case one of the shapes on the side kind of ran into this small one and now they're connected, which I really don't like. So I'm taking a small little piece of tissue here and basically just dabbing off that mistake area. Watercolor is very forgiving in this sense, so I'm dabbing it off and then I'm going to come in with a paintbrush with clean water and try to remove some of that paint from that section. And then I'm just going to let it completely dry before I try to do anything else to fix it. So here you can see I have water that I'm basically just using to try and lift up that paint, and then I'll come back in and dab it with a tissue and continue that process till I am happy that enough paint has been removed, and then like I said, let it dry completely before trying to fix it, because if you try to fix it before it's dry, the paint's just going to run again and you're going to be back in the same place. So it's important to let it dry. All right, so here we are. This is actually a few days later, and I'm really liking how this painting is looking. Everything's dry at this point, but I want to add some visual interest, and so I'm taking my Uniball Signo white gel pen and adding some interesting patterns onto some of these shapes. Not all of them, just some of them, and it can really be any pattern. And so you'll see throughout this I use some lines, some circles, some other shapes just to create some visual interest. You'll notice that that mistake area over on the right still isn't fixed, and that's because actually right before I started doing the gel pen, I used some water to remove a bit more of the pigment just because it seemed like it needed a little bit more removed. And so at this point it is still wet and I'm going to wait for it to dry before I add more paint there. At this point, that mistake area is dry enough, so I am going back in with some of the Aurora Violet paint, and I'm just going to paint in the pattern that was supposed to be there. And you'll see after I add the paint back in that you can barely tell that there was a mistake there to begin with. And like I said, this is one of the things I like about watercolor so much. It does tend to be very forgiving in this way, in that you can add water and lift paint to remove mistakes pretty easily. And now we're back to using the gel pen to add shapes for visual interest across the painting. And there really are no rules here. It's just drawing whatever shapes come to mind and whatever I think is going to look good in different areas on the page. And now I finished adding in all of my marks and shapes with my gel pen, and I'm really happy with how this is looking. So now it is time for everyone's favorite part, and that is removing the washi tape. And there you have it, a beautiful, finished first page of a new sketchbook. I hope you all enjoyed this as much as I did, and I'll see you in the next video.